reciprocate to a more amicable embrace, and in terms of etiquette, unto how I can only distinguish as established or normal or regular Americans, unto the Caucasian culture behind the check-in counter and the only black on staff, a staff manager behind the counter among them. Namadi was always utmost mannerly, and unto me personally always, while I was in, she was exceptionally civilized, even conscientious of my regard. But I say not that she exhibited an inferiority complex, for Namadi knew that she was in no tangible measure inferior, but instead that she harbored a validation complex towards whites, yet also not toward white people in general. In fact, I think that Namadi distinctly disliked white people and was merely decent enough not to let it overtly display, but rather only whites that she found exceptional. And on a hunch, I might double down and more minutely still magnify my hypothesis and attest that she was anxious to obtain the ambient validation, not only but perhaps most vulnerably, of exceptional white males in particular. and that it just so happened that she found me to be among these fabled exceptionals. But in that I never observed Namadi interact with a white woman that was comparable to her own undeniable aesthetic, that I might behold either an obsequious interaction or an ambivalent reserve, and her congenial concession or her assertive competition. And as Namadi was easily my prettiest colleague of all my inmates, except for maybe Trixie, her only close rival, so providing poor basis, though, for any reliable juxtaposition. Therefore I shall not postulate definitively, for it were guesswork, and should be ill-founded, and I'm resolved by its blunt conjecture to reside the obscure point in speculation, and because I'm pretentious, and stupid and spiteful. But because of the same postured pedigree that Namadi and I seem to reciprocate, the more intimate impetus to save and sustain face between, which by the very polarity of her ownership to my lowly maintenance man, and the dissipated disparity of the spectrum that such posture closed, seem not more than, as in beyond or transcendent, but superfluous, like parallel, to the employer-employee dynamic that she seemed to strictly maintain with all her other employees, and resonates now as respectful regard, but which semi-coy cognizance could have also been her more careful cunning, as all wear airs and assume unawares and conduct themselves to my coming, that I'm long blind to separate now portended impressions from semblance of intrigue. I had observed something, though, like the hyperbole hue of said esteem, in a conversation in the lobby that my mid-morning duties once passed around and amidst, between Namadi and one of her guests. He was an active and attractive and sociable white man, Namadi's age and familiar peer, parent of one of Namadi's son's high school classmates, with whom Namadi had been long acquainted. He seemed as though well popular among a local community of involved parents and now empty nesters. Like Namadi, probably more prosperous than most around them. Of higher, upper middle class, maybe even bottom, lower, upper class, income and means and hopes and dreams. I could tell, and it was more so clear, that Namadi held the man's opinion in high regard, several times alluding to, but via several different avenues of approach, yet in effect unto the same point, mainly the mutual success of both their parental prowess, both of their children achieving high school excellence and attending prominent universities. What's more, with her arrival at each reference to the fact, and the pivotal component of their stellar parietal proclivity, Namadi invited the man to acknowledge the point, as though each was validation of their two both apex persons of their shared pinnacle position among a people apex in time and place. The sterile, almost condescending superiority and assertiveness with which I had witnessed Namadi interact with literally every single other person within our same sphere, but which condescending superiority she had never any reason to assert over me, and so deliberately did not, With this man, such presumption simply melted away, and suddenly Namadi was a little girl fawning doubtful for Daddy's acceptance. She hated Latinas, though. Namadi did, and she treated them like subhuman burdens, less hired by than financially forced and subjected upon her. So much so that if Namadi's counsel had indeed been solicited and her permission granted prior to my termination, then her easy consent, I think, would have only been obtained because that I had too much opened my mouth and had become too loudly vocal on behalf of the Hispanic housekeepers unto Namadi's managerial left and right hands, Ron and Trixie, in my own complaints over Landra, the migrant mercenary that Namadi sicked on the maid staff and who was hired specifically to hurry and harass the Hispanic help, her fellow Latinas. And for her part, too, Landra's animosity, whole half of the problem, along with Selly, the other, which ultimately would cost me my position, hashtag sometimes him also. Landra's animosity wasn't racially inspired either. Quite the contrary, in fact. As a matter of fact, she took only too much liking to a white boy. She wanted to have sex, but apparently forgot what she looked like. And because I wouldn't, she made the workplace utterly hateful. It was the other half, Selly, the fat tub of shit, who was the racist one, and nothing was going to persuade my favor with her. But even so, that's because Selly's a spherical tub of shit, and not because someone needed to tell her to instigate or at all instruct her to be spiteful. So while racial tension at the inn was certainly present, and its detrimental consequence expressly of Hispanic catalyst, and while each and all Latinas together were every one of them dissemblers also, but also, unto that effect, no different whatsoever from the coached exchange of any and all other association with me, as there is none now, nor has there been, since many several years hence, any authenticity or anything spontaneous any more at all to my any interaction. Yet still, everything at the inn but boiled down to personal spite, and the maladaptive deposit of individual discontent. That, but for a couple of oddities of the goodwill, some cartography conjecture onto conspiracy and the watchful worm, which, albeit disturbing, yet racially is connected to these things only circumstantially, and Javi's cock envy malice at the car wash, I've come not close nor arrived at near to any axiom at all, as yet, and so hardly does all the proceedings support the grand scheme that I surmise, and portend to prove, or condones, let alone vindicates, the audacious anomalistic thesis of this long tilt, or approaches unto satisfying the burden of proof requisite to such outrageous postulate, but especially by example of my experience at the inn. This has all been such vast expenditure heretofore, unto so little accomplished. For empirical evidence has been presented, yet I've none hypothesis even established, until now explicitly I pontificate that my complaint is Catholic. However, I can at times in this dispatch convey myself insultingly, and these racial matters are all subjective, that my disposition can only but permeate my perspective, and so too my perspective can only but impress upon my reconciliation of these things, and likewise my subsequent presentation of them for others to consider. Yet as I too am firmly cemented in this scientific age, despite at times my overwhelming harshness, it is my objective to be as objective as possible in my depiction, whether it agrees with me or not. As then, and insomuch that for weeks and months my friendships with the migrant maids at the inn comprised the vast majority of my social contact, which company I was happy to share, for which I'm grateful to have enjoyed, and for almost 6 months I near daily diversified with Espanol, my hereditary English edit. They're therefore necessary to note, and those details demand factor, for they were impactful, albeit platonic to present discourse. Furthermore, I wish to make sense of myself of all this, and perhaps I sound less insane when all the evidence of my experience is ascribed circumspect, and my every scenario catalogued circumvent, and in such way as I too must reconcile it, in these moments of deep reverie, up, down, all around, now then in between, blotched but in sequence, and isolate yet all at once. Therefore, I don't aim to exaggerate that I'm not advertising for your sponsorship. All right? I'm not soliciting your vote. I'm not asking for your approval. Nor so necessarily do I care to convince you of my any premise. And what's more, I would that with irresistible argument you dismiss me, that with relief I might concede to delusions and confront them, rather than feel this pervasive powerlessness and void of volition, which since long prior to all this, I've been forced to feel. Although my heavens too should collapse upon my head, crashing down with all the weight of the noon blue skies tall still above me. If there are instances, then, in which details should ever detract, like the cave troll-likeness of the organism at the plasma place, or the cowardly cockroach at the Goodwill, in which my person presumes too much persuasion in the midst of portrayal, and imparts too much pretense unto prose, it is because the society is not a vacuum, but that my day collides with yours, and everyone else's day along the way, and everyone's day has the sun in its sky, and me, myself, and I, and sometimes your clouds make my day gray, as sometimes too my gloom can make your brightness shade. That at times to ignore impression would be to deny the significance of weather as one caught outside in a storm, or to exclude the torrent that made its recollection noteworthy. Meanwhile, aside from my regrettable garrulous, that I'm intimately familiar with the taste of toes, for as like as I so often step my feet inside my own mouth, my literary is listless, and at long length loquacious, and vainglorious, for it's very much verbose. Yet I just want to convey exactly what it is that I want to convey, that one might understand exactly what it is that I want understood. Otherwise, why else does this context exist between you and I, except that you're looking for something worthwhile to consider, and perhaps I've something worthwhile to share? Go ask someone else about their day if it doesn't matter that there is no matter to what they say. And go chatter if you want comfort food, for controversy is more difficult to palate, but there's greater sustenance and challenge. And, of course, if you want bullshit, turn on the nightly news. It's on 24/7. Why then should I rely on interpretation, and perhaps make moot my endeavor? Let hacks sell how they'll say, staffs entertain, and the pretentious take pride in creating an irrelevant enigma. For such, except but unto the void and haughty, is not the more pertinent purpose of prose, at this awful present juncture of our dismal modern predicament. And a valid voice needs not that others listen, nor that its sound is found pleasant. Motif, then, is but mere mechanic, to get concept from here to there, a platter on which substance is served, and a vehicle for better commentary and conversation throughout. The artistry is accomplished that the audience should appreciate what one, too, might observe. Complex thoughts, though, require diligent dissertation, but if the experience is not expressed, then the feeling is lost to explanation, and it's like listening to a textbook translate colorless computer code. Meh. Anyway, though, I'm long done packing my peace pipe and with another little piece of peace, and now I'm just waiting to drive so I can make peace with it. The sign guy hasn't looked at me yet. He knows he's an asshole, that he's got a little tic-tac dick. He might even be embarrassed, stymied from conceding his fault, for that he's abstracted himself introspective, analyzing why and what profit does it ever amount to him that he allows his gross, impudent, inadequate, inferior phallic nub to make all of his decisions and do all of his thinking for him. Maybe. Here's to hoping. I've thought of a title for the passage, which at the plasma place I composed on my phone. I access the text message typeface and put the thin, blinking vertical line of the cursor in front of the text that's already been typed. I insert the new title as header above the body paragraphs beneath, then hit the forward button, sending and receiving the transmission to and from myself. Perhaps you'll deduce the satire and its inspire. The Catholic Church duress. Both four eons and 7 minutes ago, church clergy imposed upon some poor child, its sick institution, plagued by perversion and aroused by the innocence that all children embody. Now they are equipped with a World Wide Web, proving that any administration so male and so pretentious is comprised of pedophiles. They are connected in the darkest corners of that web. They are come to exchange images of the abuse and the molestation of the children of that institution in pursuit of their gross gratification, that their impudent chodes might achieve erection. It is altogether derogatory and disgusting that they should be allowed to retain their testicles. And, in a sadder truth, the institution cannot alleviate, it cannot rehabilitate, it cannot atone for its sins. Its vile pedophiles, corrupt and cowardly, which have preyed upon its children, have defiled it, far outweighing any attempt to redeem or reform. The clergy will never admit, nor ever stop pursuing the pedophilia that is allowed to transpire there, but it can never convince society that they're not all a bunch of child molesters. It is for us, rather, the repulsed, to so advance now the indignation that those children who suffered such abuse have thus far so bravely acknowledged. It is rather for us to appreciate here the great justice that remains before us, that on behalf of these scarred, molested children we take increased outrage at the violations that stole in their childhoods the last innocent security of those children, that we now henceforth undertake that those perverts should never escape, but that this paternal-fraternal fog factory, that this men's bathhouse clergy administration, that this institution, under Satan, ass-cheeks spread and ready for his red-hot cock, should not perpetuate any farther, but burn to ashes, and that those perpetrating pedophile faggots of the fire, by the fire, and for the fire, should no longer continue upon the earth. Did I capture the correct tone? I wanted to convey the dire warfare that's currently being morally waged everywhere and in every way, and mankind's very soul that seems so soon, so shortly at stake, that now there's only the 24-hour affront to daily life, the non-stop battlefield bombardment upon body, brow, heart, health, spirit, mind, and soul. And the shepherds have despised their virtue, that another gird guides them, that Paul more principally is preached, whose doctrine is idolatry, meant to sift faith from chaff, and as the Son of Man with a kiss was betrayed. That the Lord be made merely the franchise logo, the corporate mascot at Divinacorp, and VIP status to the veal card carrying clients of Club Christ, very exclusive, which grants impugn to all proselytes that upgrade to the preferred convert status, license to slither licentious among Mary's little lambs. And there is no longer validity in divinity, and the deaf have not to distinguish the shepherd's voice from the hiss of vipers, that the flocks are lost, and the sheep are socialized secular, that the state has become the modern father figure, who speaks like double entendre, intending to stand for good, whose revered role, whose hollowed wisdom is hollow, for we're built on slogans, which parent is always absent, so children receive instruction over the television, and propaganda raises a multitude of orphans, as it raises thought. Raising, destroys it. That the common intellect, to this our current latex circumstance, is confounded, and retreats into fantasy.